it's not easy to put together a collection and to be responsible for it and to share it with the community at the appropriate time. And so that too becomes part of the story. Hello, I'm Yosef Wosk, and welcome to the Invisible Curtain, the 1932 Polish photographs of Nachum Tim Gidal. Tim was born in 1909 in Munich, Germany. His parents were from the Polish-Russian country to the east. Because of pogroms, anti-Semitism, they moved to Germany, good choice, in the 1902, I believe, and he was born 7 years later. When he was brought up, his parents were Orthodox Jews, and yet on the cusp between Orthodoxy and modernity, between the East from Poland and Russia, and the West, which is a whole different culture of Germany. Tim was brought up somewhat religious, but as a member of Kadima and Blue Weiss, the Zionist youth group. And when he was just past in his early 20s, he spoke with some friends and said, "None of us have ever been to the East. We haven't seen what they thought of their exotic relatives in Poland and in Eastern Europe." And he said, "Let's go." He was always an interesting person. Tim became as much known as a scholar, a historian of photography, as he was famous as a pioneering photojournalist. And so at first it looked like there was 18 or 20 fellow friends from the Zionist youth group were going to go, but on the day turned up at the train station, there were only 3 of them, Tim and 2 friends. And they went. He had cousins that they were in touch with in Poland, and they passed through what Tim later described as the invisible curtain. In the early part of the 20th century, there was a revolution in technology, from having to take the heavy cameras and the glass plates and other slow developing chemicals and papers, the cameras. From the word camera, by the way, is from the Latin word for a room. And that's what a camera was, or still is a confined, I guess, a room of technology, which at one point was a dark room. And at one point the cameras were larger, and they get smaller and smaller as technology improved. At that time, when Tim was a teenager and in his early 20s, the Leica and the Erminox cameras were invented in Germany. There were some Jewish people involved also in the development, and that was a revolution in the development, no pun intended, of film and of camera. You no longer had to lug a heavy piece of, or multiple pieces of equipment. You could now have something that we're familiar with in this digital age of cameras, something that was smaller, self-contained, you could put in your pocket, you could carry easily. There were advances in film and in development technology, and that was the birth of photojournalism, meaning you're telling the story through a photograph. Eventually, we developed other technologies. Besides the audio technologies of the radio, you had the television, and then the television coming into your living room was a revolution. The movies, and before films were shown, whether the silent or talkies, you had films showing what was going on, whether it was a war or a coronation or whatever was the weekly news. So Tim was among that small group of self-taught photographers who were the pioneering photojournalists. He started as a photographer probably in the 1928 or so, when he was about 19 or 29, when he was 19 and 20, and where he was actually just looking for some way to make a few dollars or marks to help him pay his tuition through university. He later became, as I mentioned, a great scholar. He received his doctorate in Basel in Switzerland. He left the universities in Germany because of anti-Semitism and completed his doctorate in Basel. He eventually taught at the New School of Social Research, a very important post-secondary institution still in existence today in New York. And later, when he returned to Israel, he taught as a senior lecturer at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His specialty was always the history of the image. And he wrote a book that is still considered a classic today, came out about 1974, on the history of the image, from cave to television. Now we'll do a walkabout of the exhibition, and I'll stop at a few photographs and talk about either what I see there, what I'm feeling, or some of the history of it. This was taken, this was in August 1932. They spent 3 weeks in Poland. And there's a map that's available. We'll take a look at it later, and it'll be online. You can see also where they came into Poland and the number of cities, towns that they traveled to, mostly by train. This is actually one of my favorite. It's the fiddler and his son, and they're performing buskers on the streets of Warsaw. And you can just see here Warszawa, so you know it's on the streets of Warsaw. And of course, that's a classic Jewish instrument, the violin, or an instrument that many Jews used. It expressed so deeply the soul of the people. And his son with him, I'm sure they had a cup. Probably the son would hold sometimes, and that they'd make a few dollars. It looks pretty well dressed and patient, and I don't know if Jews were paying for the symphony at those times in Poland, but here he is, and what wonderful composition. Now, Tim did not really go for composition. He did not wait, let's say. He did not want to, let's say, express himself through his camera. He was the opposite. He had the people, or whatever he was taking the picture of, express itself, and the camera was just capturing that. He also didn't like to explain a lot or talk about his picture. He would say, whatever you see, whatever the viewer sees, if he sees, that's what's there, and let the image speak for itself. This is also a beautiful, I used to think of this almost as a Rembrandt, the whites and the blacks, the movement and the still, the upturned hand and the downturned hand, the blind beggar, the young porter carrying his bags. Here's the cane of the blind man. It's just a perfect composition. That's also in Warsaw. Tim was also very good, even as a young man. Again, he was only 23, and yet there's a maturity here. And it's haunting, some of these pictures in retrospect, because in a way, when you are looking at these photographs, you're looking at ghosts. At the beginning of the war, and you have to remember, between the end of World War I, which ended in 1918, and the beginning of World War II, which began when the Germans invaded Poland in September of 1939. There's only 21 years between the two great wars. It was more of a truce. And there were more Jews in Poland at the time than any other country in the world, for various historic reasons. There were over 3.8, almost 4 million Jews in Poland. At the end of the war, there were about 350,000 left, over about 3.5 million were killed, including 90% during the Shoah, during the Holocaust. 90% of Jewish children in Europe were murdered. What you're looking at in these photographs are ghosts. Most of them, 9 out of 10 children, and from the Polish Jews, the vast majority did not survive. By us looking at them, appreciating them, we are part of Techiyat HaMetim, a type of resurrection of the dead. We're keeping their memory and their stories alive. These are yeshiva students. Here's the older rabbis. Here's the younger. Now, not so young, certainly in his 30s, talking probably with one of his teachers, and you can see how the teacher's holding his thumb up, which in a very classic, making a point, a Talmudic point there. This is a beautiful portrait of an elder, and we don't know, of course, the stories on a lot of these, whether they're related. We'll look at some other photographs. We'll notice how they are related. But just a beautiful, you can see every hair on his beard. And remember, this is all street photography that he's just taking, that he's going around. He quickly changes the focus, the light. They didn't have the automatic meters like we have today. So this is his training as the self-training, the experience of an early photojournalist. Here's what we would call a balagala, meaning a baal, a master of the agala, of the wagon. And we'll see a number of, in fact, there's probably just one picture or so of a mechanized vehicle. The people here mostly had horse-drawn wagons or carrying themselves. This is a beautiful photograph also in Warszawa and Warsaw of a schoolboy, and he catches him just off guard, a natural moment, and the way his coat falls. Another student here, and this man walking. Sometimes an incredible photograph is one where the hand is not cut off, the foot is not cut off, the space on the hat is not cut off, a horse's eye or ear, or it's the space around the image, besides the image, the positive and the negative, that makes it a great photograph. Now this one here is one of the best, where it's a group of schoolboys, and especially the boy in the center. They're looking suspiciously at the camera, as if they're protecting the community. And who is this outsider? It's a classic photograph. And this one shows the burden of labor. Again, today we would use some kind of mechanized vehicle to carry anything like this. And you see it's grainy. It was taken from a distance. It's perfectly balanced, even with the shadows. And yet he's carrying literally the weight of the world on his bent back, strapped up, and more than any person should ever have to carry. This one is a sleeping pilgrim. There are pictures, not all of them up on the wall here, but a number of them are in the book too, that Tim also took of Christian pilgrims. And you'll see some of them, they would probably be the Catholics in Poland. Some of them on their knees praying, some going in the marketplace. And here's one who's a sleeping pilgrim. This is beautiful with the sunlight on his beard. He's wearing the apron and the sweater. He's obviously a laborer. This is sitting outside. Probably that's his store. Either he works in the store or he owns it. And looking closely, you can see, they're selling razors or scissors or knives, and some of the people, the shoppers coming out. This is an interesting one, the three Gabayim, the shamashim or the sextons of the shul of the Russian synagogue in Lovich. And what I find interesting about this is that are the different clothes that they're wearing. These two on the ends are more of the same generation, and yet there are slight differences, even in the color of the coat. Whereas the person in the middle, his hat is so different from the other two. He's wearing a tie, they're not. He's wearing a short coat, what we all wear in the West these days, the short coat. They're wearing the long coat. The only thing that's the same are the shoes, and that they're respecting the work of one generation to the next, working to help with the synagogue. This is Tim's uncle, and was head of the community in Lovich, and he was the owner of a rope workshop. And if you're able to see a close-up of this photograph, and it's used also as part of the main photograph for the exhibition. It's a magnificent portrait. When you look at the photograph closely, you would see behind him there are other people standing. Whether it's these people or others, I don't know. But here is this the patriarch, both of Tim's family in Poland, and the head of the community in the town of Lovich. Just a beautiful face with piercing eyes. This is the photograph that was chosen for the cover of the book. They're two brothers. They're Tim's cousins. The odds overwhelmingly, unfortunately, is that they did not survive. Auschwitz, the town that the Germans called Auschwitz, in Poland it's called Oświęcim. And Tim and his friends, they passed through there. There's one photograph from Oświęcim. It's only about an hour train ride from Krakow in southwest Poland, where not far from the German border, For the cover of the book, I was thinking of doing Uncle Yukel, or another image. There was other people at Geffen, who are the publishers in Jerusalem. They liked one of two boys at a water pump in the town square. They thought it a happier, more inviting picture. Eventually, we settled on this, that they seemed welcoming and with light and smiling as a welcome, and come look at the rest of the family. This is his cousin Dina looking over the marketplace. Traditionally, the Jews would have a market in different areas where they lived. Whether it was a Jewish market, then it would usually be on a Monday and a Thursday. The idea was that you would not go more than 3 days without listening to the Torah. So you'd listen to it on Shabbat, and then you have Sunday. Monday you would have a market and the reading of the Torah on the Monday morning. Shorter, not the same as on Shabbat. Then you go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's always the third day, you better read the Torah again. So during the services you would do that. And while people came together for that, you'd set up a market. And it's also before Shabbat. So you would have the Thursday market, then Friday no, and then Shabbat yes. So the Jewish markets were usually on Monday and Thursday. This is the rope factory. His cousin, a younger cousin, and his more of a contemporary, Gershon. We decided to also exhibit some photographs that Tim took at different times, just to show some of his work as a photojournalist. This one is called a TV face, television face, taken in Munich, Germany in 1930. And Tim claimed that it was the first photograph, it's a historic photograph, taken from the early new technology of television. And it was not even in the general population. I don't know whether he saw this in a laboratory or in at a university where he was going to in 1930 in Munich, experimental technology, and he took the photograph. This was a photograph that he took in Meron, in the north of Israel, in the Galilee, not far from Tzfat and Tiberias. And it's called the Night of the Mystic, on the Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, and where there's a great festival. It was a few thousand people would come in those days. Today, not in the time of the pandemic, but in the general times, you'll have hundreds of thousands of people, like a great folk festival, a mystic folk festival, who gather in Meron in the Galilee. Then there's some experimental photography here, a rhomboid, where he took actually one picture and then did 3 copies of it and then put it together. And this was popular in the early 1930s in Bauhaus and other experimental photographic work at the time. And this is a copy of the original, which I was able to purchase the original from him. I have that at home. This is a grandfather and a grandson in Tel Aviv, early Tel Aviv in the 1930s. Sir Winston Churchill in Albert Hall in London in 1948. After the war, people, even though Churchill was one of the great leaders in history and rallied the the British Isles to stand up against the German invasion. At the end of the conflict, people are often say, okay, thanks, that was then, this is now, we don't need you anymore, we want to start something new, and he was voted out of office. He was later voted back in as Prime Minister. And this is the time when he was speaking, and Tim, again, as a photojournalist and getting these jobs and living on and off in London, was able to photograph Churchill. And he did these photographs, he cut them together, put them together, and put a triptych, 3-in-1 of Churchill. During the war, during World War II, Tim was with the British Army, mostly in North Africa, in Tunisia, Algeria, and Egypt. At one point, he had enough of that and wanted to get out of it, and made his way through into India. This is in Bombay, 1940. And you can see Tim was just a few feet away from Gandhi and traveled with him for a number of days also on train as they were moving through India. This photograph, this boy here holding the flag, and the flag, on the flag it says Buchenwald. This was taken in Atlit, which is near Haifa. Camp, a center for survivors from the Holocaust to come in. It was still run by the British at that time. This is 1946, I believe, a few months after the war. So if this was just after the war, they would all be starved. They've now had a few months to be cleaned and clothed and know that they're coming to Israel and to begin a new life. This person here was 8 years old at the time. He grew up to become Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, who became the chief rabbi of Israel. He was the youngest. That's why they let him carry the flag, the youngest of the boys of Buchenwald, the survivors that came to Israel. This was from the same group, with Elie Wiesel was among that group, and here in Vancouver, Robbie Weissman, it was part of that group. Rabbi Lau was in Vancouver. He was brought here a couple times, and once a few years ago, Beit HaMidrash, the Sephardic congregation, brought him in as part of a fundraiser. I showed him this photograph, this very one, and said, "Do you remember this?" And he smiled and said, "Yes, this is me." And he signed the back of it in Hebrew with the blessing. So this is a wonderful photograph. There are more stories. I could talk for half an hour about this story and Rabbi Lau. This is a survivor, a young teenager, and it's called number 177633. He's a survivor of the Dachau death camp. And Tim took this picture again in an athlete in Israel near Haifa in 1946, just after the war. And when you look closely at the photograph, you could see it either here in person or in the book. It has his number tattooed on his arm. This photograph, and there are a few more of the cemetery, towards the end of their 3-week trip through Poland, they were up in the north in what the maps of Europe change like waves in the ocean. And at that point, Vilna, or Vilnius, was in Poland in many years before that, and now it's Lithuania. And this is the shomer, the guard at the grave of the graveyard, the Beit HaKvorot in Vilnius. And the picture there of the guard taking Tim's friends and him through the graves of the different tzaddikim, the people who were buried there. The most well-known is the Vilna Gaon, the genius of Vilna, lived in the mid-1700s, and whose work and inspiration is felt even today. What's up here, and I have more at home, is the largest collection of Gidal photographs outside of Israel. In the book, we have about 85 or 90% of the photographs here are from the collection of photographs I purchased from him, and we have here in Vancouver. And the other photographs are from the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This is the one that you had asked about, what image we thought for the cover of the book, and this was the original one. It was going to be a close-up, but it's two happy boys, especially one showing off. Look, I can do the pump, and here's this guy with the camera taking pictures, and I'll be the star of this show. And so they thought that would have been, I wanted a photograph that had more gravitas, but I'm glad the photograph that was used for the cover was very good. These are porters. Again, there was not a lot of mechanization, and so people, even elderly people, were doing all the labor. And here's the porters waiting, resting in the shade. Remember, it's the hot summer day for a job where if they can make a few zlotys and carrying something. Here's the map of Poland, and hopefully you'll be able to see a close-up and of some of their travels. Here's Auschwitz, or Auschwitz, right near the German border, and then Krakow, Lublin, Lodz, Warsaw, Białystok, Vilna, and where they traveled during their 3 weeks. This is the opening photograph, Tim and a friend consulting the map in probably in Warsaw. This is, we have a number of pictures that Tim took, because they didn't have markets exactly like this in Germany, so this was kind of exotic, seeing how the people sold things. And so it's you'd set up your potatoes, and here's the man selling, probably to Polish non-Jewish people, the mother and her daughter with the braids, beautiful braids, and they're bargaining over how much is a kilo of potatoes. And with so many people, you could spend a lot of time looking and discovering in this photograph. This is in Trzebinia, one of the towns, and it's a yeshiva student. Now, Tim worked very quickly and honestly and directly, and that's what he was like as a person. Before I met him for the first time, because I wanted to find, when we were in Israel in 1992-93 for sabbatical, I wanted to find the photographer who took that original picture of the Chassid at the grave of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron. And when Vivian Silver, who was the owner of a photography archive in Israel, I purchased some late 19th century, early 20th century Israeli photographs, a lot from German photographers who moved to Israel during that time. And then I dared to ask, and do you know the photographer of this picture, Nachum, Tim Gidal? And she said, yes, as a matter of fact, I have some of his photographs, and he doesn't live very far from here. Would you like to meet him? And within a couple days, she had arranged for us to meet him. We went over to his house, and she did warn me. She said, he may have a bit of a temper. He could be contentious, so just be warned. But Tim and I hit it off right away. I was a little bit afraid at first, but a wonderful story. At our second meeting, I dared to ask him, Tim, would you be my teacher? Meaning in photography and in the history of photography and images and looking. And he, in his typical forthrightness, answered, I don't need any more students, but I could sure use a friend. He was 82 years old at the time. Again, a picture of a Jewish balagala with the signs behind, some in English lettering, the Roman letters J. Lewin, and here in Yiddish. This is a photograph, if you get a close-up to look at it, is actually one of my favorites, but not everyone sees it. It reminds me of a Robert Frank photograph that's on his book of his first book of American photography called The Americans, where he takes a picture of a bus. And when you look at it at first, you say from the outside, and people are looking out, and you say, well, what's so important about that photograph? And then you see the people of color sitting at the back and the white people sitting at the front. You see the way that they're looking out. It says so much about America, about the society, the culture in the 1940s and early 50s. There's something about the outsider, as Tim was here, being able to look with greater detachment, objectivity at what they're viewing, and then that in turn informs the people who live in that society, and leaves us a clear record, even what is this, 80 years after the photographs were taken. This is the selling potatoes in Lublin. Of course, there's Isaac Bashevis Singer, the great Yiddish writer, who wrote about Lublin, the magician of Lublin, and here this woman is sitting with her basket, and laid out in front of her are baskets of potatoes, and not everyone could afford a store or even a stall to rent in a marketplace twice a week, so they would bring their clothes, the schmatas, the potatoes, and they would find a street corner, lay it out, and sell whatever they could at a discount. And when you look closely at the picture too, you get a picture of the infrastructure of the town, the cobblestones and the sewage, the water running through, the competition on the other corner, and even the street number. You know exactly where they were. A beautiful portrait of a peasant woman, in a way carrying the weight of the world within her face. So there's so much expression on her face, and the way with the babushka covered up. And as we conclude with the final photograph, again, a classic portrait taken as he's walking down the street with a quick click of the shutter, with the person remaining not on guard but very comfortable, and yet with a penetrating gaze. And he's, you can tell, beautifully balanced with the Hebrew, the Yiddish letters, and you know that he is a porter. Look how he's dressed, aesthetically, with the lines of his shirt, of the blacks and the whites. He's got his rope for carrying things tied around his waist, and volumes just speaking through his eyes. A really classic, wonderful photograph. So, this, by the way, is the book that after many years we were finally able to get published. Tim asked me, as I got to know him, and the last time I saw him in Jerusalem in 1986, a few months before he died, he had published during his lifetime over 30 books, some on photojournalism, on the history of the image. He did a series of books called My Village, or World Villages. He and his wife, they traveled around the world. He took photographs in Africa and South America, in the East, in Europe, in America, all over. And I forget now if it was Random House. They published a series of 23 books that were very popular and sold hundreds of thousands of volumes. This was finally done through Geffen Publishing House in Jerusalem and New York. I had the images for over 20 years before fulfilling Tim's deathbed wish. He said, I want you, Yosef, to publish these photographs. And he said, it doesn't need a lot of text. Again, his teaching was, let the images speak for themselves. So this is what we would call a promise kept.